The tin of sugar cookies felt heavier than it should have in my hands as I stood before the towering iron gates of my son's new mansion. 6 months. 6 months since Max had moved into this fortress of brick and marble. And this was my first invitation. If you could call a grudging text message an invitation. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Mom, if you want to see the house, come by Sunday at 3. Don't stay long. I adjusted my yellow dress, the one I'd worn to court hearings and parent-teacher conferences for 40 years. Professional armor for a professional woman who'd spent her career as a family law attorney, watching other people's families crumble while somehow believing mine was different. The irony wasn't lost on me now. The intercom crackled when I pressed the button. Yes? Juliet's voice, clipped and cold. My daughter-in-law of 15 years. The woman I'd helped put through nursing school when Max was struggling to establish his construction business. It's Angelina. I'm here to see Max. A pause. Long enough that I counted 3 heartbeats. He's busy. I smiled at the camera, knowing she could see me. I brought cookies. The oatmeal chocolate chip ones he used to love. Another pause. Then the gate clicked open with an electronic hum that seemed to echo in my chest. The driveway curved through landscaped gardens that screamed money. The kind of money Max had never had growing up in our small ranch house on Maple Street, where I'd raised him and his sister after their father walked out. The kind of money that apparently made you forget where you came from. The front door was solid mahogany, probably worth more than my car. I knocked, 3 firm raps, and waited. When it opened, my breath caught. Not because of Max's success-softened face or his expensive polo shirt, but because of what I saw behind him. My grandmother's china cabinet, the one I'd given him temporarily when I downsized almost 2 years ago, the one that held 4 generations of family memories. My mother's wedding dishes, my grandmother's crystal, the silver tea service that had been a wedding gift in 1952. Mom. He didn't step aside to let me in. You said you'd only stay a few minutes. I brought cookies, I repeated, holding up the tin like a shield. Over his shoulder, I could see Juliet hovering in the foyer, her arms crossed. Behind her, through the archway to what looked like a living room, I spotted more familiar pieces. My father's leather reading chair, the antique lamp I'd inherited from my aunt, items that weren't supposed to be permanent fixtures in their home. That's nice. Max's eyes darted back toward his wife. But we're actually having people over later and don't let her in. Juliet's voice cut through the air like glass. She doesn't belong here. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my smile fixed in place. Professional smile. The one I'd perfected in courtrooms when opposing counsel thought they could intimidate me. Max's face flushed red, but he didn't correct his wife. He didn't defend me. He just stood there, blocking the doorway like I was a door-to-door salesperson he couldn't quite shake. I see. I set the tin of cookies down on the stone step between us. Well then, I suppose I should be going. But as I turned to walk back down that pristine driveway, my mind was already calculating, cataloging, planning. Because what Max and Juliet didn't realize was that I hadn't come to visit. I'd come to collect evidence, and I'd gotten exactly what I needed. The drive home took 20 minutes through suburban streets lined with modest homes where children played in yards, and neighbors knew each other's names. My neighborhood, the one where I'd chosen to stay after the divorce, where I'd built a life of quiet dignity and careful savings, where I'd raised 2 children who I thought I'd taught better than what I'd just witnessed. My house sat on a corner lot, white clapboard with blue shutters and a garden that I tended myself. Nothing grand, but mine. Paid for with 27 years of legal work, of helping other women navigate divorces and custody battles, of building a practice one case at a time while being both mother and father to my children. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The professional smile finally cracked, and I felt the familiar burn of tears behind my eyes. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Inside, the house felt different, emptier. Not because of the missing furniture. I'd gotten used to that. But because of what I'd learned today. The china cabinet wasn't a temporary loan anymore. Neither was my father's chair or any of the other pieces I'd entrusted to Max's care when I'd downsized. I walked to my kitchen, smaller now without the antique hutch that used to display my mother's everyday dishes, opened the refrigerator and poured myself a glass of white wine. The same brand I'd been drinking for 15 years. Nothing fancy, but it suited me. Then I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. Angelina Schumer, attorney at law, may have officially retired 6 months ago, but Angelina Schumer, the woman, still knew how to research, still knew how to build a case. Max's construction company had done very well in recent years, well enough to afford a $3 million house, apparently. I pulled up county records, business filings, tax assessments, numbers that painted a picture of success built on contracts I'd helped him secure through my professional connections, loans I'd co-signed when banks wouldn't take a chance on him, a business license application where I was still listed as a reference. But it was the property records that made my blood run cold. The house, their house, was in both their names. In my archived email from their closing, I found the closing disclosure listing gift funds, family, the exact $347,000, together with my bank wire receipt from the week before the deed recorded. The same amount as my mother's life insurance policy, the one I'd cashed out last year to help with what Max said were temporary cash flow problems with a major construction project. Money I'd given freely because he was my son, because he'd promised it was a loan that would be repaid within 6 months. Money that had apparently bought him and Juliet their dream house, while I sat in my emptied home, eating dinner alone at a table that used to seat 8. I took another sip of wine and reached for my phone. There were calls to make, documents to review. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this betrayal ran. Because if Max thought I was just some helpless old woman he could dismiss on his doorstep, he was about to learn how wrong he could be. After all, I'd spent 3 decades teaching other women how to protect themselves from the people who claimed to love them. It was time to practice what I'd preached. The laptop screen glowed in the darkening kitchen as I pulled up another file. This one contained copies of every check I'd written, every transfer I'd made, every loan I'd given over the past 5 years. A paper trail that would make any forensic accountant proud. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Mrs. Schumer? This is Carol, your old neighbor from Pine Street. I heard you moved. I was wondering if we could talk sometime. I could really use some advice. Carol McKellen. I remembered her. Young mother. Worked nights as a nurse while her husband traveled for work. We'd had coffee a few times when I still lived in the bigger house, when she'd needed someone to talk to about balancing career and family. I typed back quickly. Of course, dear. Are you free for lunch tomorrow? Her response came immediately. Yes, please. And Mrs. Schumer, thank you for remembering me. I stared at the message for a long moment. Here was someone who remembered kindness, who valued connection, someone who understood gratitude. Everything my son apparently did not. I closed the laptop and finished my wine, already planning tomorrow's conversation with Carol. But more than that, I was planning something much bigger. Max had made one crucial mistake today. He'd shown me exactly who he'd become, and more importantly, he'd revealed that he'd underestimated who I still was. A woman who'd spent her career protecting herself and others from people who thought love was a weapon and family was a business transaction. The irony was perfect, really. My own son had just handed me the biggest case of my life, and this time, I was both the attorney and the plaintiff. Carol McKellen looked exactly as I remembered her, petite, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and kind eyes that held more wisdom than her 32 years should have allowed. She sat across from me at the small cafe downtown, nervously stirring sugar into her coffee. I wasn't sure you'd remember me, she said, glancing up with a hesitant smile. It's been almost 2 years since you moved. I remember everyone who was kind to me during that transition. I cut a piece of my blueberry scone, watching her carefully. Moving after 25 years in a house isn't easy at any age. Carol nodded, her fingers tapping against her coffee cup. That's part of why I wanted to talk to you. About transitions, about starting over when everything feels impossible. There was pain in her voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. I recognized it from countless client consultations. That moment when someone realizes their life has changed forever and they need help navigating the aftermath. Tell me what's happening. She took a deep breath. Yvonne left 3 months ago. My husband. He said he needed space to figure things out, but I found out last week he's been living with someone else. A woman from his company. Her voice cracked slightly. They're getting married next month. I set down my fork and leaned forward. Carol, I'm so sorry. Do you have legal representation? I can't afford a lawyer. Not a good one. She laughed bitterly. Ivan was always the one who handled our finances. I trusted him completely. Now I'm finding out we're behind on everything. The mortgage, credit cards, even my daughter Megan's school fees. He cleaned out our joint accounts before he left. My blood pressure spiked. Another man who thought marriage was a license to steal. Another woman learning too late that love without boundaries was an invitation for exploitation. How old is Megan? 15. She's taking it really hard. Blames herself, thinks if she'd been a better daughter, maybe. Carol wiped her eyes with a napkin. I'm working double shifts at the hospital, but it's not enough. We're going to lose the house. I studied Carol's face, seeing echoes of every client I'd ever represented. Every woman who'd discovered that the person who promised to love and protect them had been systematically destroying their security instead. What kind of nursing do you do? Pediatric ICU at General. It's what I trained for, what I love, but the hours are killing me. I barely see Megan anymore. She paused. Mrs. Schumer, I know you're retired, but I was hoping maybe you could recommend someone. Someone who might work with me on payment plans? I sipped my coffee, thinking, not just about Carol's situation, but about timing, about how the universe sometimes provides exactly what you need when you need it most. Actually, Carol, I might have a better solution. I've been thinking about coming out of retirement for the right case. Something that matters. Her eyes widened. You'd consider taking my case? I'd consider more than that. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my notes from the previous evening's research. I've been looking into some of my old professional contacts. There's a position opening up at Barry, Martin and Associates. They handle a lot of family law cases. They're looking for an experienced paralegal with nursing background for custody cases involving medical issues. Carol stared at me. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity. The pay is substantially better than hospital nursing. The hours are more predictable, and you'd be helping families navigate some of the most difficult times in their lives. Plus, Barry owes me several favors. I helped train half their junior associates. But I don't have legal experience. You have something more valuable. You understand what it's like to be vulnerable, to have someone you trust systematically destroy your security. That kind of empathy can't be taught. I leaned back in my chair. There would be conditions, of course. Carol nodded eagerly. Anything. You'd be assisting me with a few special cases. Pro bono work, mostly. But cases that matter to me personally. And you'd need to be comfortable with the fact that sometimes justice looks different than forgiveness. Something shifted in Carol's expression. A hardness that I recognized. The moment when someone stops being a victim and starts being a survivor. Mrs. Schumer, if you're talking about going after people who hurt the vulnerable, who use love as a weapon, I'm more than comfortable with that. I'm ready for it. Perfect. That afternoon, I sat in my home office, the spare bedroom I'd converted when I moved to the smaller house, with files spread across every surface. Carol had left our lunch meeting with instructions to call Barry's office that evening and a letter of recommendation I'd written on the spot. She'd also left with something else. Purpose. Now I had mine. My phone rang at exactly 3 o'clock the following Sunday. Max, right on schedule. He'd been calling every Sunday at 3 for 6 months. A dutiful son checking on his aging mother. The irony of his timing today wasn't lost on me. Hi, Mom. His voice carried that forced cheerfulness that meant he was feeling guilty about something. Good. Hello, Max. A pause. He was probably expecting me to bring up yesterday's disaster, to cry or plead or make him feel bad about Juliet's behavior. So, how was your week? Productive. I shuffled through the property records on my desk. I had lunch with a young woman today. Someone who's been treated very badly by someone who claimed to love her. Oh, that's sad. Yes, it is. It's amazing how some people can look someone in the eye, accept their help, their money, their trust, and then just Discard them when they're no longer useful. Silence. I could practically hear him squirming. Mom, about yesterday. Yes? Juliet was she's been stressed about the housewarming party. She didn't mean to be rude. Interesting. He was offering me an opening, a chance to accept his flimsy excuse and pretend everything was fine. 6 months ago, I might have taken it. I see. And what's your excuse, Max? My excuse for what? For standing there and allowing your wife to tell me I don't belong in a house furnished with my family's antiques, purchased with my money. Another silence, longer this time. Mom, that money was a loan. A loan with no written agreement, no payment schedule, and no interest. A loan that was supposed to be temporary to help with cash flow problems that apparently didn't exist since you were able to qualify for a $3 million mortgage. How did you... He caught himself. Look, the business is doing really well now. We can discuss repayment. Max. My voice went cold. Do you think I'm stupid? Of course not. But do you think that because I'm your mother, because I love you, I don't notice when I'm being lied to and manipulated? Mom, you're overreacting. Am I? Let me tell you what overreacting looks like. I pulled out the list I'd prepared. Overreacting would be filing a lawsuit tomorrow, demanding immediate repayment of $347,000 plus interest and penalties. Overreacting would be contacting every contractor and supplier you've worked with to let them know about your questionable business practices. Overreacting would be calling your mortgage company to discuss the source of your down payment. The silence stretched so long I thought the call might have dropped. You wouldn't do that, he finally said. But his voice had gone shaky. 3 days ago, you would have been right. But that was before I drove to your house with homemade cookies and watched my son stand by while his wife treated me like a stranger. That was before I realized that the man I raised, the man I sacrificed for, the man I supported and loved unconditionally, sees me as nothing more than an ATM with inconvenient emotions. That's not... Max, I spent 30 years helping women protect themselves from men who thought love was a transaction. I should have recognized the signs in my own life. Mom, please. I'm not finished. You have 2 weeks to return every piece of my furniture and every family heirloom currently in your possession. You also have 2 weeks to provide me with a written repayment plan for the $347,000, including interest calculated from the date you purchased your house. 2 weeks? Mom, that's impossible. Then I suggest you start making phone calls. Because if I don't see satisfactory progress by then, you're going to discover exactly how much legal trouble one retired attorney can cause when she has nothing left to lose. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline rush of finally standing up for myself. Of remembering who I was before I became someone who could be dismissed on doorsteps. The house felt different already. Not empty, but expectant. Like it was waiting to see what I would do next. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. Got the interview. Tomorrow at 10. Thank you for believing in me. I smiled and typed back. Believing in each other is how we survive. You're going to do great. Then I opened my laptop and began typing a very different kind of document. Not a legal brief this time, but a letter. One that would go out to a very select group of people who had helped build Max's success over the years. People who might be very interested to know how he treated the woman who had made it all possible. The game had begun, and I was finally playing by my own rules. Carol got the job. I wasn't surprised when she called me 3 days later, breathless with excitement and relief. What did surprise me was how quickly Barry, Martin, and Associates wanted her to start. Monday morning, with a salary that would allow her to keep her house and Megan's private school. They said you gave me the highest recommendation they'd ever seen from you, Carol said over the phone. Mrs. Schumer, I don't know how to thank you. You thank me by being excellent at what you do, and by helping me with something that matters. Anything. Just tell me what you need. I looked at the stack of documents on my kitchen table. Business records, loan agreements, mortgage papers, and a timeline I'd constructed showing exactly how Max had systematically exploited my trust over the past 5 years. It wasn't just the life insurance money. It was smaller loans that were never repaid, business expenses I'd covered, even the security deposit for his first office space that I'd never gotten back. I need you to help me understand the psychology of someone who could look at the person who sacrificed everything for them and see only opportunity. Carol was quiet for a moment. You mean Max? I mean my son, yes. But also your husband Ivan. My ex-husband Samuel. All the men who think love is a resource to be mined instead of a gift to be treasured. What exactly are you planning? I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. Justice. The kind that courts can't always deliver, but life can. By Thursday, I still hadn't heard from Max. No apology, no repayment plan, no acknowledgement of my ultimatum. But I had heard from other people. The first call came from Constance Berry herself, senior partner at the law firm where Carol now worked. Angelina, I have to ask you about something delicate. Constance's voice was careful, professional. I had a very strange call yesterday from someone claiming to be your son. He was asking about our new hire, Carol McKellen, and suggesting that she might not be reliable. My grip tightened on the phone. What exactly did he say? He claimed she was emotionally unstable due to her divorce, that hiring her might be a liability for the firm. He also suggested that you weren't thinking clearly these days, that you might be compromised in your judgment. The audacity took my breath away. Max wasn't just ignoring my demands. He was actively trying to sabotage Carol's new life, to punish me by destroying something I cared about. Constance, I need you to know that Carol McKellen is one of the most competent and trustworthy people I've ever met. As for my mental state, well, I've never been more clear about anything in my life. I figured as much. But Angelina, what's going on? This level of vindictiveness from a family member trying to undermine someone's employment. It's concerning. I took a deep breath. Constance, how many cases have we worked together over the years? Dozens. You referred some of my best clients. And in all that time, have you ever known me to be wrong about someone's character? Never. Then trust me now. Max is attempting to control a narrative that no longer belongs to him. Carol deserves that job, and I deserve better than a son who thinks he can manipulate me into silence. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and felt something crystallize inside me. Max had crossed a line I hadn't even known existed. It was one thing to steal from me, to dismiss me, to treat me like an inconvenience. But targeting Carol, trying to destroy an innocent woman's livelihood to get back at me, that was unforgivable. The second sign that Max was escalating came Friday morning. I was in my garden, tending to the late-season roses, when my neighbor Gail Martin appeared at the fence between our yards. Angelina, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but did you have some kind of trouble with your family? I straightened up, brushing soil from my hands. What makes you ask? Well, yesterday a young man came by asking questions about you. Said he was concerned about your well-being. Wanted to know if I'd noticed any signs that you weren't taking care of yourself properly. My blood ran cold. What did this man look like? Tall, brown hair, expensive clothes. He said he was your son, Max. Gail Martin's expression was worried but also suspicious. He asked if I'd seen you acting confused or forgetful, if your house was being maintained properly. It was odd. Max was building a case, creating a record of concerned inquiries about his poor, declining mother who might not be competent to make her own decisions. It was a classic manipulation tactic, one I'd seen used in custody cases and financial abuse situations. He was trying to lay groundwork to challenge my mental capacity if I followed through on my threats. Gail Martin, what did you tell him? I told him you were the sharpest woman on this street, and that if he didn't know that about his own mother, maybe he was the one with problems. She smiled grimly. I also told him that if he had concerns about your well-being, he should be talking to you directly, not interrogating your neighbors. I could have hugged her. Thank you. Angelina, is everything all right? This felt very wrong to me. I looked at this 75-year-old woman who had lived through her own share of family betrayals and disappointments, who understood that sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you most need protection from. Gail Martin, would you do me a favor? If anyone else comes around asking questions about me, would you let me know? And would you be willing to write down what Max said yesterday, just in case I need a record of his visit? Her eyes sharpened. You think he's trying to cause trouble for you? I think my son believes that being family gives him the right to take whatever he wants from me without consequences. And I think he's about to learn how wrong he is. That afternoon, Carol came by my house for what we'd started calling our strategy sessions. She'd thrown herself into her new job with impressive dedication, but she'd also become my most trusted advisor in what was rapidly becoming a complex chess game. He's trying to discredit both of us, I told her, showing her the notes I'd taken from my conversations with Constance and Gail Martin. Carol read through them carefully. This is actually good news. I raised an eyebrow. How is character assassination good news? Because he's panicking. People who are in control don't resort to desperate measures like this. He knows you have him dead to rights on the money, so he's trying to create an alternative narrative where you're an unstable old woman who can't be trusted. She was right. Max was acting like someone who knew he was caught but was too proud to admit it. The question is, what do we do about it? Carol smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, it wasn't kind. It was sharp, calculating. We let him keep digging his own grave. Every lie he tells, every person he tries to turn against you, every attempt to manipulate the situation, it just makes him look worse. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we build our own narrative. One that's based on facts instead of manipulation. She pulled out a folder she'd brought with her. I've been doing some research of my own. Did you know that Max's company has been involved in 3 different disputes over the past 2 years? Payment issues with subcontractors, permit violations. One case where a client sued for shoddy workmanship? I hadn't known. How did you find this out? Public records. Court filings. It's all there if you know where to look. Your son's business practices aren't exactly stellar. Carol spread out the documents like she was laying down cards in a poker game. There's more. Remember how he said the business was doing so well that he could afford the house? According to public court dockets, mechanics' lion records, permit violations, the state licensing board's postings, his company had been under financial strain and named in several disputes. Losses that would make it very difficult to qualify for a mortgage without substantial outside assistance. The picture was becoming clearer. Max hadn't just used my money as a down payment. He'd probably used it to inflate his assets for the mortgage application, which meant he'd committed loan fraud in addition to exploiting his own mother. Carol, you realize what this means? It means we have him. The question is what you want to do about it. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the garden I'd built with my own hands, at the life I'd created through decades of hard work and careful choices. A life that my son had tried to systematically strip away, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, memory by memory. I want my family's belongings back. I want my money back. And I want Max to understand that there are consequences when you treat people like they're disposable. And if he doesn't respond to reason? I turned back to Carol, this young woman who'd become my partner in seeking justice, who understood that sometimes love without boundaries was just another word for exploitation. Then we moved to the next phase. Which is? I smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt genuine. We remind everyone who knew us both exactly what kind of person raised Max Schumer and what kind of person he chose to become despite it. Carol nodded, understanding immediately. You're going to tell the truth, publicly. I'm going to tell the truth. And I'm going to let Max live with the consequences of his choices. The ultimatum deadline was still 3 days away, but I already knew Max wouldn't meet it. He was too proud, too convinced that he could manipulate his way out of accountability, which meant it was time to prepare for war. The deadline came and went, like a whisper. Sunday at 6 p.m., I sat at my kitchen table with my phone beside me, waiting for a call that never came. No apology. No repayment plan. No acknowledgement that Max had even received my ultimatum. Just silence, as loud and clear as any answer he could have given. At 6:15, I opened my laptop and began typing. The letter was addressed to 15 people, contractors who had worked with Max, suppliers who had extended him credit, clients I had personally referred to his business over the years, people who knew me, who respected my judgment, who had trusted my recommendation when they hired Schumer Construction. Dear friends and colleagues, I am writing to inform you of a situation that has developed with my son Max's business practices. As many of you know, I have supported Schumer Construction both financially and through referrals since its inception. I believed I was helping a young man build a solid, ethical business that would serve our community well. I have recently discovered that this support was obtained through systematic deception and manipulation. Max has appropriated family belongings entrusted to his care, has failed to repay substantial loans, and has used funds provided for business emergencies to instead purchase personal property. More concerning, when confronted with these issues, he has chosen to respond not with accountability, but with attempts to discredit both myself and others who have questioned his behavior. I felt it was important that you know this, not out of vindictiveness, but because character matters in business relationships. The same lack of integrity that Max has shown in his family relationships may well manifest in his professional dealings. I apologize if my previous recommendations have caused any difficulties, and I wanted to ensure you have all relevant information for any future business decisions. Sincerely, Angelina Schumer, attorney at law, retired. I read it through 3 times, checking for any hint of emotion or hyperbole. It was professional, factual, devastating. Then I attached the closing disclosure showing the gift funds, family, and my bank wire receipt documenting the $347,000, along with a spreadsheet detailing every loan I had given him over the past 5 years. 15 emails sent into the night like arrows finding their targets. Carol arrived Monday morning with coffee and the grim satisfaction of someone who had spent her weekend conducting reconnaissance. I drove by Max's house yesterday, she said, settling into my kitchen chair with the familiarity of someone who belonged there. 3 cars in the driveway I didn't recognize. Expensive ones. The housewarming party Juliet mentioned. Probably. But here's the interesting part. I also stopped by the construction site where his company is working on that new subdivision. Talked to some of the workers on their lunch break. I raised an eyebrow. And? Payroll has been irregular lately. Some of the subcontractors haven't been paid in 6 weeks. There's talk that the main contractor is looking for a new electrical company. The dominoes were starting to fall, exactly as I'd hoped they would. Word traveled fast in the construction industry, especially when it concerned reliability and payment issues. Carol, I didn't say anything about you or the letters. I just asked casual questions about working conditions. She smiled. Amazing how much people will tell you when they think you're just making conversation. My phone rang, interrupting us. Unknown number. Mrs. Schumer? This is Andrew Ellis from Ellis Plumbing. We've worked with your son's company on several projects. My chest tightened. Yes, Mr. Ellis. What can I do for you? Well, I got your email yesterday, and I wanted to thank you for the heads up. We've been having some payment issues with Schumer Construction lately, and your information helps explain a lot. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be sorry. Be proud that you raised a woman with enough backbone to speak up when something's wrong. Too many people stay quiet when they should be warning others. After he hung up, I stared at the phone. A woman with backbone. When was the last time someone had described me that way? Good news? Carol asked. Confirmation that we're doing the right thing. The second call came an hour later, then a third. By noon, I had heard from 8 of the 15 people I'd contacted. 3 thanked me for the warning. 2 shared their own concerning experiences with Max's business practices. 3 asked if I needed any assistance, legal or otherwise. None of them expressed surprise. He's been showing his true colors for a while, Carol observed. You just gave people permission to acknowledge what they were already thinking. That's when Max finally called. What the hell do you think you're doing? His voice was raw with fury, all pretense of dutiful son abandoned. I'm protecting people from making the same mistake I did, I said calmly. Trusting you. You're destroying my business. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've told the truth. If the truth destroys your business, Max, that says something about the foundation it was built on. You vindictive bitch. Careful. My voice went ice cold. You're speaking to the woman who gave you life, raised you, supported you, and loved you unconditionally for 35 years. The woman whose money bought your house and whose reputation built your client base. Show some respect. Silence. Then, Mom, please, I can explain everything. The money, the furniture, We can work this out. Too little, too late. The pleading tone that might have worked a week ago now just sounded like manipulation. You had 2 weeks to work it out, Max. You chose to spend that time trying to discredit me instead of taking responsibility for your actions. That's not, look, can we meet? Face to face? We can discuss repayment terms, returning your things. Just call these people back. Tell them you were mistaken. I wasn't mistaken. Mom, I'm your son. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with all the weight they had once carried, all the power they no longer held. Yes, I said finally. You are, and I'm your mother. The mother you allowed your wife to humiliate on your doorstep. The mother whose financial support you took for granted while calling it a loan. The mother whose belongings you stole while pretending it was temporary storage. I never meant, Max, intent doesn't matter anymore. Impact does. And the impact of your choices is that you've lost the right to call me for help when your poor decisions catch up with you. You can't do this to me. I can't? I almost laughed. Max, I'm not doing anything to you. I'm simply refusing to protect you from the consequences of your own behavior. There's a difference. The line went quiet except for his breathing. So what happens now? He asked finally. Now you learn to live with the choices you made. You find a way to pay your workers and your subcontractors with your own money instead of mine. You figure out how to maintain a business based on actual merit instead of manipulated relationships. You discover what it's like to be accountable to people instead of entitled to their resources. And us? Our relationship? I looked across my kitchen at Carol, who was listening with the focused attention of someone who understood that some conversations change everything forever. What relationship, Max? For 5 years, you've treated me like a bank account with inconvenient emotions. You've taken my money, my belongings, my trust, and my dignity. When I finally demanded basic respect, you responded by trying to convince people I was mentally incompetent. Mom, you want a relationship with me? Then become someone worthy of one. Someone who understands that love is not a transaction and family is not a business opportunity. Someone who can apologize not because they got caught, but because they understand the harm they caused. How long? His voice was barely a whisper. How long what? How long do I have to prove myself? For the first time in our conversation, I heard something that might have been genuine remorse. But I also heard the calculation underneath it. The question of how long he had to pretend before things could go back to the way they were. Max, this isn't a punishment with a predetermined end date. This is a consequence. And consequences last as long as they need to. I hung up and turned off my phone. Carol was watching me with something that looked like admiration. How do you feel? I considered the question seriously. How did I feel? For months I had felt hollow, diminished, like a supporting character in my own life. Now I feel like myself again. The scary part is over? I shook my head. The scary part was living as someone I didn't recognize. This part, standing up for myself, demanding accountability, refusing to be diminished. This part feels right. Carol nodded. So what's next? I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the garden where I had planted every flower, tended every plant, built something beautiful with my own hands and my own vision. A garden that belonged to me, in a house that belonged to me, in a life that I was finally ready to claim fully. Next, we build something better. We? I turned back to her, this young woman who had become my partner in reclaiming dignity, my ally in demanding justice, my reminder that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. Carol, you've helped me remember who I am. Now let me help you become who you're meant to be. She smiled, and I saw in her face the same determination that I felt in my own chest. We were both done being victims. We were both ready to be survivors. The phone started ringing again, but I didn't answer it. Whatever Max had to say could wait. I had more important things to do than listen to excuses from someone who had finally learned that actions have consequences, and that love without respect is just another form of exploitation. The war was far from over, but for the first time in years, I was fighting on my own terms. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my house, my home, preparing Thanksgiving dinner for 4 people. Not the 8 or 10 I used to cook for when I desperately tried to hold together a family that was already broken, but 4 people who had chosen to be here, who valued what I offered, who understood that gratitude was more than a word. Carol arrived first, with her 15-year-old daughter Megan and a homemade pumpkin pie. Megan had been wary of me at first, suspicious of any adult who claimed to want to help after watching her father abandon them. But 3 months of steady presence, of showing up when I said I would, of treating her mother with respect, had earned me a tentative place in her trust. "Mrs. Schumer, Mom said you used to be a lawyer," Megan said, settling into the chair that had become hers during their weekly visits. "Like, a real one who went to court and everything?" "I did. For 30 years. Did you ever help kids whose parents were jerks?" Carol shot her a warning look, but I smiled. "Many times." "Why do you ask?" "There's this girl at school whose dad won't pay child support, and her mom is working 3 jobs, but they still might lose their apartment." I told her maybe there was something that could be done. I exchanged a glance with Carol. We'd talked about this. The possibility of me taking on a few pro bono cases, working with families who needed help but couldn't afford legal fees. Carol's new position at Barry, Martin & Associates had reminded me how much I missed the satisfaction of solving problems, of standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. "Tell your friend to have her mother call me," I said. "I might be able to help." The second arrival was Gail Martin from next door, carrying a dish of her famous green bean casserole and the sharp-eyed wisdom of someone who had survived her own share of family betrayals. She'd become an unexpected friend over the past months. Someone who understood that dignity was something you claimed for yourself, not something others granted you. "Angelina, dear, you look wonderful," she said, embracing me warmly. "Happiness suits you." The third guest surprised everyone, including me. A knock at the door at exactly 2 p.m. revealed my daughter Catherine, standing on my doorstep with a bottle of wine and an expression I couldn't quite read. Catherine lived in Denver now, had for 5 years since her divorce. We'd grown distant after she'd sided with Max during my separation from their father, convinced that maintaining family unity meant accepting whatever treatment was offered. We'd spoken perhaps a dozen times since I'd moved to this house. "Hi, Mom." She stepped inside hesitantly, as if she wasn't sure of her welcome. "Catherine, what a surprise. I hope it's okay that I came. I know you weren't expecting me." I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd learned to recognize, the calculated emotions that meant someone wanted something from me. Instead, I saw uncertainty, genuine nervousness, and something that looked like regret. "Of course it's okay. You're always welcome here." We sat down to dinner, an eclectic group of women spanning 3 generations, bound not by blood but by understanding. The conversation flowed easily around topics that mattered. Megan's college plans, Gail Martin's volunteer work at the community center, Carol's growing confidence in her new career. Catherine was quiet at first, listening more than talking, observing the dynamic of this chosen family I'd built. It was only when Carol mentioned a particularly difficult case she'd been assisting with, a grandmother seeking custody of her grandchildren from an abusive father, that Catherine spoke up. "Mom, is it true what I heard about Max?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Carol and Gail Martin knew the whole story, of course. Megan knew the basics, that sometimes family members weren't trustworthy, that adults could be selfish and hurtful. But Catherine had been getting her information secondhand, filtered through family gossip and Max's version of events. "What did you hear? That there was some kind of falling out, that you sent letters to his business associates, that his company is struggling now." I set down my fork and looked at my daughter directly. "Catherine, what exactly do you want to know?" She fidgeted with her napkin. "I want to know what really happened, because the story I got from Max doesn't make sense. He says you overreacted to some misunderstanding about money, that you're going through some kind of difficult phase. And what do you think?" "I think the mother I know doesn't overreact to anything. I think the woman who raised us to value honesty and accountability wouldn't destroy someone's business over a misunderstanding." Catherine's voice grew stronger. "I think Max is lying, and I think I've been an idiot for believing him." So I told her everything. The systematic financial exploitation, the stolen family heirlooms, the humiliation at his doorstep, his attempts to discredit me and sabotage Carol. I spoke calmly, factually, without embellishment or emotional manipulation. When I finished, Catherine was crying. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have seen what he was doing." "Catherine, you live 2,000 miles away. You couldn't have known, but I could have trusted you. When you moved to this house, when you seemed different, sadder, I should have asked more questions. I should have been there for you instead of assuming everything was fine." Carol reached across the table and squeezed Catherine's hand. "The important thing is that you're here now." "Am I? I mean, can I be? I know I haven't been the daughter you deserved, but—" Catherine looked around the table at these women who had become my family. "I want to do better. I want to be someone you can count on." I felt something shift in my chest. A door opening that I'd thought was permanently closed. Not the desperate hope I used to feel when my children showed any sign of affection, but something steadier. A willingness to let Catherine earn her way back into my trust. That depends on you, Catherine. On who you choose to be going forward. I choose to be someone who shows up. Someone who asks questions instead of making assumptions. Someone who stands with you instead of trying to make peace at your expense. After dinner, while Carol and Megan helped with dishes, and Gail Martin dozed in my father's reclaimed reading chair, retrieved from Max's house the week after our confrontation, along with all my other belongings, Catherine and I sat on my back porch watching the sun set over the garden. "He's really struggling, you know," she said quietly. "Max lost 3 major contracts last month. Juliet is furious about having to cancel their trip to Europe." I felt a brief flicker of something that might have been sympathy, quickly extinguished. "And how do you know this?" "He called me, asked if I could talk to you, convince you to make things right." "And what did you tell him?" Catherine smiled, and for the first time I saw echoes of the strong woman I'd raised her to be. "I told him that maybe it was time he learned to make things right himself." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Gail Martin's cat prowl through my flower beds. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy? I mean, really happy? Not just making the best of things?" I considered the question seriously. Was I happy? 6 months ago, I would have said that happiness wasn't the point anymore, that I was focused on dignity and autonomy instead. But sitting here with women who valued me, who sought my advice, who showed up when they said they would, who treated my home like a place worth visiting. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I am happy. Maybe not the way I thought happiness would look at 62, but yes." "Good." Catherine leaned back in her chair. "You deserve that. You deserve all of this." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my chest tightened. After 3 months, I still had a Pavlovian response to unexpected communications, still braced for Max's attempts at manipulation. But the message was from someone else entirely. "Mrs. Schumer, this is Ivan Martinez. Carol McKellen gave me your number. My sister's ex-husband is trying to take her kids, and she needs legal help but can't afford much. Carol said you might be able to help. Would you be willing to talk to her?" I showed the message to Catherine, who read it with growing understanding. "You're going back to work. In a way, pro bono cases mostly. People who need an advocate but can't afford one." I looked at my daughter, gauging her reaction. "What do you think?" "I think it's perfect. I think you're taking everything Max tried to steal from you, your expertise, your connections, your sense of purpose, and using it to help people who actually deserve it." Carol appeared in the doorway, dish towel in hand. "Everything okay out here?" "Everything's perfect," I said, and meant it. Later that evening, after my guests had gone home and the house had settled into its familiar quiet, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, responding to Ivan Martinez's text. "I'd be happy to talk to your sister. Have her call me tomorrow evening at 7. And Ivan? Tell her that sometimes the best revenge against people who try to diminish us is building something beautiful with our lives." I sent the message and closed the laptop, feeling the deep satisfaction of a day well lived, of a life reclaimed on my own terms. Tomorrow I would start helping another family fight for what was theirs. Tonight, I would sleep in my own bed, In my own house, surrounded by my own choices and the people who had earned the right to be there, Max could keep his mansion and his manipulations. I had something better. I had myself back. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.